The signal came without warning. No slow approach. No distant blip on a radar screen growing closer over hours. One moment the space around Earth was empty. The next, it was full. 40,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel all at once, forming a perfect sphere around the planet, close enough that people in cities with clear skies could see them with the naked eye, dark shapes blotting out stars, hanging there like a second sky made of metal and threat. Every screen on Earth flickered at the same moment. Every phone, every television, every public display board in every city and town and village. The signal overrode everything. It did not ask. It simply appeared. The face that filled those screens was not human. It was tall, even sitting down, with dark scaled skin and 4 eyes arranged in a wide line across its face. Its neck was thick. Its mouth barely moved when it spoke, but the words came out in clean, perfect English, and in 37 other languages simultaneously, each broadcast perfectly matched to the region receiving it. The creature identified itself as Grand Voice Rithkal, speaking on behalf of something called the Galactic Dominion. It listed 7 species under that name. It spoke about centuries of expansion, about order, about the management of lesser worlds. It spoke the way someone speaks when they are reading a list they have read many times before. Calm, flat, certain. Then it delivered the terms. Humanity was to surrender all advanced technology, weapons, ships, energy systems, communications networks, within 24 hours. 70% of Earth's surface was to be cleared and handed over for Dominion colonial use within 90 days. The remaining human population would be permitted to continue existing under Dominion governance as a vassal species. There would be no negotiation. There would be no second offer. The fleet surrounding the planet would begin total annihilation in 72 hours if these terms were not accepted in full. Then the screen went dark. For about 4 seconds, the orbital platform above the North Atlantic was absolutely silent. The soldiers and analysts stationed there stood at their screens without moving. Commander Adisa Usu, head of Earth's Unified Defense Council, stood with his hands flat on the edge of a table, staring at the space where the alien's face had been. His face gave nothing away. He was the kind of man who had trained himself over 30 years to give nothing away, and he was doing it now, even though inside he was running numbers, and none of them were good. It was Corporal Danny Brask who broke the silence. He was 23 years old. He was stationed near the back of the room, monitoring a secondary communication feed, and he had watched the whole broadcast with his mouth slightly open. When it ended, he sat back in his chair, looked at the dark screen, and then, because his brain simply did not have another option ready, he laughed. Not a long laugh, not a performance. Just a short, sharp, involuntary sound, like someone who had just heard something so enormous and impossible that the only available response was that. Then he muttered, mostly to himself, "They have to be joking." Nobody reprimanded him. Nobody even turned to look, because half the room was thinking exactly the same thing, and the other half was too stunned to react to anything at all. What nobody in that room knew, not yet, was that a technician 2 floors below had left a secondary camera feed running, and that feed was connected to a live stream channel that 14,000 people happened to be watching at that moment. Danny's laugh and his quiet comment were captured cleanly. The clip was 11 seconds long. Within 4 minutes it had been shared 100,000 times. Within 20 minutes, 1,000,000. Within 2 hours, it was the most watched piece of footage on every platform on Earth. People added captions. People added sound effects. People clipped it next to the alien's flat, serious face and looped them together. Danny Brask did not know any of this was happening. He was still at his station, now very much afraid and trying not to show it. Upstairs, Commander Adisa was already on a call with the United Earth Council. The discussion was grim and fast. There was no military option that made sense. 40,000 ships against the entirety of Earth's combined space-capable forces was not a war. It was arithmetic, and the arithmetic was not in their favor. What they needed was time, and to get time, they needed to understand what they were dealing with. That was where Dr. Priya Nair came in. She was Earth's lead xenolinguist, which meant she studied the way alien species communicated, not just their words, but everything underneath the words, the pauses, the body language, the assumptions baked into the way a sentence was built. She had spent 15 years preparing for a first contact moment. She had not imagined it would look like this. Adisa had her on the line within the hour. She had already watched the broadcast 4 times. "They've done this before," she said. "The phrasing, the structure, it is a template. They have given this speech to other species, possibly many others." "And those species?" Adisa asked. Priya was quiet for a moment. "The speech assumes they surrender." Adisa took that in. He asked her to keep watching, keep analyzing, and to tell him anything she noticed that might be useful. Then, before he ended the call, Priya said one more thing. She had been watching the alien's face during the broadcast very carefully, she explained. She had noticed something specific in how its 4 eyes had moved at one particular moment during the feed, a micro-expression, barely anything, gone in under a second. She had looked at it frame by frame. It happened the moment Danny Brask laughed. "Adisa," she said, "I think that laugh confused them, genuinely confused them. And I think that might be the most important thing that has happened today." Adisa did not smile, but something shifted slightly in his eyes. "Then let's not waste it," he said. Deep inside the Dominion flagship Absolute Verdict, in a room with no windows and no natural light, a machine was failing. It was not a mechanical failure. Nothing sparked or broke. The machine was running perfectly. That was the problem. It had been fed the 11-second clip of Corporal Danny Brask laughing, and it had been running ever since, trying to produce an output, and the output it kept producing was a blinking error notification that translated roughly as stimulus response loop unresolvable. Analyst Voon stood in front of that screen and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He was the Dominion's leading expert on species behavior. He had studied 41 civilizations. He had written the predictive models that helped the Dominion calculate, with high accuracy, how a new species would respond to the standard ultimatum: panic, then grief, then submission. The model was almost never wrong. The model had never seen laughter before. Voon was a narrow creature with pale gray skin and long fingers that he pressed together when he was thinking. He pressed them together now and watched the error notification blink. Then he pulled up the full broadcast feed and watched Danny Brask's face again. The laugh, the muttered comment, the complete absence of the fear response that every other species had shown in this exact moment. He flagged it for grand voice recall. He used careful language in his report. He said the human response was anomalous. He said the predictive model required additional data. What he did not say, because it felt too large and too uncertain, was what he actually believed: that something had gone wrong with the plan the moment that young soldier opened his mouth. He did not know yet how right he was. Because while Voon was standing in that dark room aboard the flagship, watching one clip on repeat, the entire surface of Earth had caught fire, not literally, but in the way that only humans could manage. The laughter had spread. It started with the clip itself going viral, which was fast enough. But within 6 hours, something else had started building on top of it. People were not just sharing Danny Brask's laugh. They were adding to it. A digital artist in Lagos made a cartoon of the alien fleet hovering over a city while a man below shrugged and drank his tea. A woman in Seoul wrote a comedic list titled, "Things the Alien Ultimatum Forgot to Consider." A retired history teacher in Argentina made a 40-minute video comparing the Dominion's demands to every other impossible demand ever made throughout human history, and why none of them had ever worked. A comedian named Alu Said, known mostly for his work in West African circuit theater, went live from his apartment kitchen. He sat at a small table, looked directly into the camera, and calmly, cheerfully, with perfect timing, read out the alien ultimatum point by point, and after each one, paused and said, "Right, sure, absolutely." The pauses were timed perfectly. By the end of the video, people were laughing so hard that comment sections were full of people admitting they had fallen off their chairs. 2 billion people watched that video in the first day. More watched it after that. Aboard the Absolute Verdict, Sub-Commander Hale brought Voon a new batch of intercepted human broadcasts. Hale was broader than Voon, more military in his bearing, and he had a practical mind that had always served him well. He was not practical about this. He set the files on the table and looked at Voon with something close to unease. "They are making art about it," Hale said. "Images, moving pictures, spoken performances all about us, about the fleet, about the ultimatum." "Are they frightened?" Voon asked. Hale was quiet for a moment. "Some of them are, but the ones making the art, they do not look frightened. They look like they are enjoying it." Voon pressed his fingers together. He said nothing. "Voon," Hale said, "we have done this 42 times. I have been part of 17 of those campaigns personally. Not one species has responded this way. Not one." "I know. So I am asking you, as the expert, what does this mean? What do the humans know that the others did not?" Voon looked at the error notification still blinking on his screen. He did not have an answer that made sense yet. What he had was a feeling, and he did not like feelings because feelings were not data. He pushed it aside and went back to work. Down on Earth, in a different kind of room, Commander Adisa was watching the same internet explosion with a very different expression. He was not laughing, but he was paying attention. Priya Nair was beside him, and she was making notes at a rate that suggested she had not slept and had no plans to. "They are watching all of this," Priya said. "Every clip, every broadcast. Their surveillance systems are scanning our entire network. I would bet on it." "Good," Adisa said. Priya looked at him. "Good. If they are watching, they are not certain, and if they are not certain," he stopped. "Let the sentence finish itself." Priya nodded slowly. She understood. An enemy that was certain did not bother to observe. An enemy that watched and could not make sense of what it saw was an enemy that had a crack in it, even if the crack was small. "I need to tell you something," she said. She pulled up Voon's behavioral model, not because she had hacked it, but because she had reverse-engineered its assumptions from the structure of the ultimatum itself. Their entire contact strategy is built on one assumption, that the species receiving the ultimatum will respond with fear as the dominant signal. Every calculation they make after that is based on fear being present and visible. Adisa folded his hands, "And when it isn't?" "Then they have no map," she said. "We are in territory their models have never charted." She paused, then added something quietly. "We are not the first species to laugh in the dark, Adisa. We are just apparently the first one to do it loud enough for the whole galaxy to hear." Outside in the dark above Earth, 40,000 ships held their position. Inside one of them, a machine kept blinking its error. And on the planet below, Alu Said was already writing his second video. With 48 hours left on the countdown, the Dominion did something it had never done before. It blinked first. Not publicly. Publicly, Grand Voice Rithkal remained perfectly still and perfectly silent. The fleet did not move. No weapon powered up. No further broadcast was made. But a tight beam signal, encrypted, narrow, directed only at Earth's primary orbital platform, arrived in the early hours of the second day. It was a private channel request. The Dominion wanted to talk. Commander Adisa was awake when it arrived. He had not really slept. He read the request, then read it again, then called Priya and Counselor Dara Mensa into the room. Dara was 61 years old and had spent the last 3 decades negotiating things that seemed impossible to negotiate. Border disputes, resource wars, the kind of conversations where two sides hated each other so deeply that even sitting in the same room felt like a surrender. She had a gift for it that was hard to name. Not charm exactly, more like a kind of steady patience that made other people feel that the conversation was not going to collapse as long as she was in it. She had been woken up and flown to the orbital platform by priority transport, and she had arrived with her coat still half-buttoned and her hair not quite sorted, and she looked at the channel request and said, "Good, they're scared." Addisa raised an eyebrow. "They have 40,000 ships." "Doesn't matter," Dara said. "Scared is scared." The back channel opened on both sides. Rithkal did not appear on the human end. Instead, a quieter figure appeared, Sub-Commander Hale, formal in his body armor, his four eyes scanning the human faces on screen with an intensity that was not quite hostile. It was something closer to hunger. He wanted to understand something and did not know how to ask for it yet. Dara opened. She thanked him for reaching out. She said Earth was open to conversation. She said it simply and without any of the weight that a lesser diplomat might have added, because adding weight to an opening statement signals that you need something, and she needed him to feel that she did not need anything. She was simply here. Hale came to the point faster than she expected. He asked why the humans were not afraid. Dara tilted her head slightly. She said, "We are afraid." Hale's posture shifted. "Then why?" "We're afraid," she said again. "We're just very good at it." The translation lag was about 2 seconds. She watched Hale process it. The answer did not fit anything his models had prepared. He sat with it longer than she expected, which told her something important. He was genuinely thinking, not performing. What followed was 3 hours of conversation that started as a negotiation and slowly, quietly, became something else. Hale began asking about human history, not as intelligence gathering, or not only that, but as something closer to actual curiosity. He asked about the wars humanity had fought between itself. He asked about the plagues and the famines and the natural disasters. He asked in particular about the events that should have ended humanity, the moments where, by all reasonable calculation, the species should have broken and didn't. Dara answered everything honestly. She talked about collapses and recoveries. She talked about the Black Death and how Europe lost a third of its population and then rebuilt. She talked about world wars and what came after them. She talked about how humanity had spent centuries absolutely certain it was about to destroy itself and somehow kept stepping back from the edge, usually arguing loudly the whole time. Hale listened without speaking for long stretches. He was recording everything. Meanwhile, below on Earth, the engineers were not idle. Nobody had formally authorized what they were doing, but in orbital construction yards around the world, teams of engineers and mechanics were quietly, efficiently converting deep space mining rigs into something that could, loosely, be called weapons platforms. They were improvised, ugly, and almost certainly outmatched by Dominion military technology. The engineers knew this. They did it anyway because doing something, anything, felt better than doing nothing. They named the platforms informally, writing the names in marker on access panels and hull sections. Plan B, the apology. Last resort, not really. One crew, somewhere over South America, named theirs Fine, we tried. A video of the nomming process leaked onto the internet within hours and got 30 million views. The comments were mostly people laughing, and then admitting they were also crying a little. The Dominion surveillance systems picked up the construction activity. Voon flagged it immediately. Rithkal studied the footage in his private chamber, watching the humans weld and bolt and write jokes on the sides of things that were meant to be weapons. He watched for a long time. He did not know what to make of it. The craft being built were not a serious military threat. He knew that. His weapons could turn them to gas. But that was not what bothered him. What bothered him was the names, the jokes. The fact that these creatures were preparing to fight a war they had almost no chance of winning, and they were doing it while writing, "Fine, we tried," on the side of the ship. He had faced 42 species. Some had fought, most had surrendered. But none of them had ever made him feel like he was missing something, like there was information he did not have. He made a decision privately, and he told no one about it. He adjusted the countdown timer in the fleet's central system, extended it by 12 hours. He logged it as a technical recalibration. He did not explain further. Back on the orbital platform, when the back-channel session with Hale finally ended, Dara sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "He's going to recommend they pause," she said. "You're sure?" Addisa asked. "Not sure," she said, "but he came here to find a reason. I think he found enough of one." Addisa nodded. He was already thinking ahead. He had one more move he wanted to make before the deadline, and it involved Corporal Danny Brask, the young soldier who had started all of this with 11 seconds of involuntary honesty. He had an idea that the Dominion needed to hear a human laugh, not through a screen, not through a recording, but in person, up close, real. He sent for Danny Brask and told him to pack a bag. Danny's expression was something between confused and terrified. "Don't worry," Addisa told him, "just be yourself." Danny looked at him. "That's what I'm worried about, sir." The neutral station was called Platform Reach, a small, old structure built decades ago for routine scientific exchanges that had mostly fallen out of use. Nobody had imagined it would one day be used for this. Its corridors were narrow, its lighting was standard white, and it smelled faintly of recycled air. It was the most ordinary place in the solar system, and somehow, because of that, the most important one on the day the human delegation walked in. Addisa led. Dara was beside him. Priya came next, with a small recording device in her coat pocket and a notebook tucked under her arm, because she still believed in paper when the moment truly mattered. Danny Brask came last, in a pressed uniform that someone had clearly ironed that morning in a hurry, with the small gold tag of a newly promoted specialist pinned to his chest. He had been told he was part of the team. He had not been told why. He suspected, but he had decided not to think about it too hard. The Dominion delegation was already there. Grand Voice Rithkal stood at the far end of the central meeting room. He was taller in person than any screen had conveyed, almost 3 meters, with a stillness that was not calm so much as coiled. His 4 eyes moved across the human group the moment they entered, taking stock in a single sweep. Subcommander Hale stood slightly behind and to his left. Analyst Voon was at the edge of the room with a data pad, partly hidden by the doorframe, not sitting at the table. He had the look of someone who very much wanted to be invisible. The humans sat. The Dominion sat. Rithkal opened with the full ultimatum, read word for word, exactly as he had broadcast it 2 days ago. He did not change a syllable. His voice was flat and even and gave nothing away. When he finished, he paused, and then, for the first time in the entire exchange, he went off the script. "I have one question," he said, "before the formal proceedings continue." Addisa nodded. Rithkal's 4 eyes settled on Danny Brask. "You," he said, "you were the one who laughed." Danny straightened slightly in his seat. He was clearly aware that every person in the room was now looking at him. He swallowed once. "Yes," he said, "that was me." "Explain it." There was a long pause, not because Danny was afraid or not only because of that, but because he was actually thinking about it. Priya noticed that. She noted it in her book. "I saw the fleet," Danny said, "and I saw your face on every screen, and I heard what you were asking, and my brain, it just couldn't hold the size of it. It was so big and so impossible that I didn't have a serious reaction ready. So it came out as a laugh. That's all it was." Rithkal was still. "You were afraid." "Terrified," Danny said. "Then why did you laugh?" Danny thought about it for another moment. Then he shrugged, a small, honest shrug. "Because laughing felt better than crying, and crying felt like giving up, and I wasn't ready to give up yet." The room held that answer like a room holds a sound after a piano chord. Nobody moved for a moment. And then Subcommander Hale made a sound. It was short, very short. It came from somewhere in his chest, not quite forced out, not quite voluntary. It was over almost before it began, and he suppressed it immediately, pulling his posture straight, looking at the wall. But it had happened. Priya's pen was moving before the sound was done. Voon, at the edge of the room, had his data pad raised and his eyes were wide. Adisa did not react outwardly. He kept his face exactly where it was, but under the table his hand moved and tapped Priya once on the knee. She passed him her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and on it she had written 4 words: "They can do it." He looked at it, he passed it back. What happened next surprised everyone, including the diplomats who had been trained to expect surprises. The formal ultimatum proceeding simply stopped, not because anyone called for them to stop. They just stopped being the shape of the conversation. Rithkal asked another question. Adisa answered it. Dara asked one back. Hale answered. And what was supposed to be a final, formal, ultimatum meeting became something that none of the protocol documents had a name for. Rithkal wanted to know about human fear, what it felt like from the inside, how humans had learned to function while it was present. He asked about the wars and the disasters the same way Hale had asked Dara, but more directly, with less pretense of strategy. He was simply asking, and in the asking, something about his bearing changed. It did not soften exactly, but it opened, the way a window opens just slightly to let air through. Dara asked carefully about the Dominion's history, about the first species they had ever conquered, about what that had looked like. Rithkal answered without hesitation. He described it in the matter-of-fact way that someone describes something that was, to him, simply the natural order. But when Dara asked whether any of those species had survived in good condition under Dominion rule, his answer was slower, more considered. He named 3 species. Then he paused and admitted that 2 of them no longer existed. "Not our doing," he said quickly. "Disease, internal collapse." "Of course," Dara said, and she said it so neutrally that Rithkal had no way of knowing whether she believed him. Near the end of the session, Rithkal said something that nobody in the human team had expected. He said it quietly, in a tone that was different from anything he had used before. He said that in 42 first contact situations, every species had performed fear in a way the Dominion had been able to read, categorize, and respond to. The fear had been a language, and the Dominion knew that language well. Humans, he said, did not speak that language. He did not say it as a compliment. He said it the way a navigator says that the map has ended and the territory beyond it is unknown. There was something in his voice that might have been unease, or might have been the very first, very quiet note of respect. When both delegations stood to leave, Rithkal paused at the door. He looked at Danny Brask one last time. Danny looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but Danny did not look away, and he did not look down, and after a moment Rithkal turned and walked out. The ultimatum was not withdrawn that day, but when the delegations returned to their respective ships and stations, the countdown clock was suspended. Not reset, suspended. The Dominion's Internal Emergency Council was being called into session, something Voon would later note in his private logs that had not happened in over 200 years. Priya read that note in her book on the shuttle back. They can do it. She underlined it once. The Dominion Council met in a room that had not been used for an emergency session in 214 years. It was deep inside the absolute verdict, behind 3 sets of sealed doors, in a chamber that was circular and dim, and built for exactly this. A moment when the 7 species of the Dominion needed to sit together and decide something that the normal chain of command could not decide alone. The table was round. The seats were designed for 7 different body types. The air was carefully balanced to be breathable for all of them, which meant it was comfortable for none of them. Voon stood at the center. He had not been invited to sit. He had been awake for 51 hours. His data pad contained the most comprehensive analysis of a single alien species that the Dominion's Behavioral Division had ever produced. Assembled in less than 3 days from open broadcasts, intercepted communications, surveillance footage, and the recordings from the back-channel talks and the face-to-face meeting. He had done the work of 6 analysts alone because he could not trust anyone else to understand what they were looking at. He began his presentation without ceremony. He laid out the facts plainly. The human response to the ultimatum had broken every predictive model the Dominion used, not partially, entirely. He showed the error logs. He showed the models running on other species and their accurate outputs. He showed the models running on human data and the results, unresolvable, undefined, outside known parameters. He explained as clearly as he could why this mattered. "We have always used fear as our primary measurement," he said. "Every calculation we make, when to press, when to offer terms, when to act, is based on the fear signal. When fear is present, the sequence works. We know what happens next because we have seen it 42 times." He paused. Around the table, 7 sets of alien eyes watched him. 3 of the delegations had their weapons readiness representatives in the room. Voon noticed that and kept his voice steady. "The human fear signal is present," he said. "I want to be clear about that. They are afraid. Physiologically, biochemically, the fear response is there. But they have developed a social mechanism that sits on top of it, a shared cultural reflex that converts fear into group bonding behavior rather than submission behavior. The laughter is not the absence of fear. It is what they do with it." He pulled up the footage of Danny Brask. He let it play. The short, involuntary laugh, the quiet comment, he let the council sit with it. Then he pulled up something else. He had found it in the archive 2 days ago and had been sitting with it, uncertain, before deciding he had to show it. It was old footage, 4 centuries old, from the conquest of a species called the Verath. Small, pale-skinned people who had lived on a rocky planet in a distant system. The Dominion had arrived. The Dominion had delivered the standard ultimatum. The Verath had responded in a way the fleet at the time had classified as a malfunction. Some of them had laughed. The report filed at the time read, "Emotional irregularity likely indicating cognitive breakdown under stress. Proceed as planned." The Verath no longer existed. Voon let the council look at the Verath footage, and then at Danny Brask's footage, and he said, "This is the same mechanism. We destroyed it 400 years ago because we did not understand it. I am now asking whether that was the single greatest mistake in our history." The room was very quiet. 3 council members spoke in favor of proceeding with the ultimatum. The humans were unpredictable, they said. Unpredictable species were dangerous. The correct response to danger was to eliminate it. They were not wrong from a purely logical position, and Voon knew it. He also knew it was the same logic that had killed the Verath. 2 council members, including the representative of Hale's species, argued for a full pause. They cited Hale's back-channel report. They cited the behavioral data. They cited the simple, uncomfortable fact that in 42 contact situations, they had never once felt that the target species might know something they did not. 2 abstained. In Dominion law, an abstention in a deadlocked council passed the decision to the grand voice alone. Rithkal sat at his seat and said nothing while the others spoke. He had been sitting quietly for 2 hours, which was unusual for him. He was not normally a quiet deliberator. He had watched everything. He had listened to everyone. When it was finally only his voice left in the room, he did not speak immediately. He looked at the Verath footage one more time. Then he looked at the Earth feeds that were still running live on the secondary screens at the edges of the room. And what was on those screens was not a military briefing. It was surveillance footage. One of the Dominion's orbital observation probes had been positioned above a neighborhood in a city called Accra. Below it, on the rooftop of a building, a group of humans had set up tables and chairs and cooking equipment. They were having a gathering, a social event, directly under an alien surveillance probe with 40,000 warships visible in the sky if you looked up. They were looking up. Several of them had noticed the probe. One of them had made a sign, large letters on a piece of flat material that said, "Hello, we made food." Another person was waving. Someone had brought a large decorated cake. They were eating and talking and laughing, and one of them had a small instrument that they were playing, and others were dancing badly to it in the way that people dance when they know they dance badly and have decided that does not matter. Rithkal watched this for a very long time. The other council members had gone quiet. Then something happened that had not happened in that room in a long time. One of the abstaining delegates, a narrow, pale species called the Veth, made a sound, short, involuntary, quickly swallowed, but it happened. A second Veth delegate made the same sound 2 seconds later. A third made it while looking at the sign that said, "Hello, we made food." Voon recorded all of it. His hands were shaking slightly. Rithkal finally spoke. He did not announce his decision formally. He simply said, "Summon Counselor Dara Mensa, privately, no formal record." The weapons readiness, representatives exchanged glances. "The fleet," one of them asked. "Holds position," Rithkal said. "No warm-up, no action." He stood, he moved to leave. At the door he stopped, and without turning back he said one more thing. He said it quietly, almost to himself. "Voon, what do you think they put in the cake?" The room had no answer for that. Voon did not have an answer for that. But he noticed that when Rithkal walked out, his posture was different from how it had been when he walked in. Something in the shoulders, something very small. Something that, if you had studied human body language even briefly, you might have recognized as relief. Nobody ever found out exactly what Rithkal and Counselor Dara Mensa talked about for 14 hours. There was no record kept of the meeting, no transcript, no audio log, no diplomatic summary filed on either side. Dara came out of it looking tired in the specific way that people look tired after a very long, very serious conversation. Not exhausted, but settled, the way someone looks after they have finally said something they had been carrying for a long time. Adisa met her in the corridor outside. He looked at her face and he waited. "He's tired," she said. "Of the fleet, of us." "Of all of it," she said. 42 contact situations, 200 years of expansion, 7 species trying to manage something that started as survival and turned into empire. He didn't say any of that directly, but he didn't need to. She paused. "He asked me what humans do when they are tired of something." "What did you tell him?" "I told him we complain about it loudly to people we trust, and then we make tea, and then we figure out what to do next." She smiled slightly. He found that very strange. "Did it help?" "I think it might have," she said. "Yes." The formal final session was held the next day. The full delegations. The round table on platform reach again. The same recycled air, the same narrow corridors, the same ordinary station that had now become the most historically significant place in the solar system. Rithkal read a prepared statement. It was carefully written and deliberately technical. It referred to the suspension of the ultimatum as a strategic reassessment in light of novel species-class data requiring extended evaluation. It said nothing about laughter or cake or Corporal Danny Brask or 14 hours of private conversation or a behavioral model that had broken itself trying to understand an 11-second video clip. It was the kind of statement designed to let everyone in the room pretend that a very large thing had not just happened. The human delegation accepted it without comment. Then Subcommander Hale spoke, and what he said was not prepared. He said it plainly, looking at the human delegation with the direct, unblinking attention of his species. He said he wished to formally request a program of exchange. Dominion observers stationed on Earth, cultural observers, not military and human liaison personnel aboard Dominion vessels. He said this was his personal recommendation and that it had been approved by the Grand Voice. He said the Dominion had never made such a request before in 2 centuries of contact with other species. Nobody on the human side reacted visibly. But under the table, Danny Brask's knee was bouncing with the effort of not reacting. The proposal was accepted. The paperwork, such as it existed between species with entirely different legal systems, was begun. Dara and Hale spent 2 further hours going through the structure of it, and they did not argue once, which Dara privately noted was the most remarkable negotiation she had ever been part of. When everything was signed, when both delegations stood and prepared to leave, Voon crossed the room toward Priya. He moved carefully, the way someone moves when they are not sure of their welcome. He stopped a few feet away and stood there for a moment, holding his data pad to his chest. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "A personal question, not for the record." "Go ahead," Priya said. "The laughter, what does it feel like, from inside?" Priya looked at him for a moment. She thought about it seriously, the way he seemed to need her to think about it seriously. "It feels like your brain admitting it cannot fix everything," she said, "and then deciding that's all right, just for now, just enough to keep going." Voon was quiet. He looked down at his data pad, then back at her. "We do not have a word for that," he said. "I know," she said. "You should get one." He nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but he did not know the words for that either. He turned and walked back to his delegation. The fleet left Earth orbit over the following 18 hours. Ship by ship, in the same silence they had arrived in, they pulled back into the dark. No ceremony, no final broadcast. 40,000 ships were there, and then, gradually, they were not. The second sky made of metal dissolved back into stars. On Earth, nobody was calm about it. The news broke in waves, first the withdrawal, then the exchange agreement, then the full story of everything that had led to it, which came out in pieces over the days that followed and which the internet reassembled and argued about and made into an enormous amount of art, comedy, analysis, and in at least 3 cases, full musical productions. Corporal Danny Brask, Specialist Danny Brask now, was interviewed by every network that could reach him. He gave essentially the same answer every time. He said he had just laughed. He said he was sorry about the whole thing going everywhere. He said he was glad it had worked out. Someone in Lagos made a small statue of him. It showed him mid-laugh, hands slightly raised, eyes crinkled. It was not a grand statue. It was about the size of a large dog, but people kept leaving things at the base of it, notes, little drawings, flowers, in the way that people mark the places where something important happened by some ordinary person who wasn't trying to be important. 6 months later, the first Dominion cultural ship arrived. It was smaller than the war vessels, narrower, with a different profile, built for observation and transit, not intimidation. It came in slowly, broadcasting its arrival on every open frequency, and it took up a position in high orbit that was polite in a way that 40,000 warships had not been. Aboard the ship was a young woman named Surai, working her first assignment as a human cultural liaison. She had studied xenolinguistics under Priya and had been selected partly because of her scores and partly because, when asked why she wanted the posting, she had said, "I want to see what they find funny." She was standing at the main observation window when the ship completed its arrival approach. Below her was Earth, the arc of it, blue-green and luminous and familiar and enormous. The ship sent its formal greeting signal down to the planet's surface communication networks. A sound came back up. Not a signal, a sound. Crowd noise rising from several different broadcast points simultaneously. Cheering, laughter, music, the distant pop of what might have been fireworks. The Dominion navigator at the controls looked up from her panel, her 4 eyes wide. "What is that?" she asked. Surai was already smiling. She had been smiling since she had first heard it. "They're cheering," she said, "and probably making memes." The navigator processed this. She looked back at the planet. The lights of cities were visible on the dark side, scattered across continents like someone had thrown a handful of sparks onto dark cloth. "Is that good?" she asked. Surai pressed her hand against the window glass. Down there was the rooftop in Accra. Down there was a small statue in Lagos. Down there was Danny Brask, probably in some interview right now, shrugging at cameras. Down there was a species that had faced 40,000 warships and responded by making cake. With them, she said, always. The ship settled into orbit. The cheering kept coming up from below, warm and uninvited and completely impossible to categorize. The navigator listened to it for a long time. And somewhere in her chest, she felt something she had no word for.